In this video, we're going to go over one of the major elements of narrative writing, dialogue. We'll learn what dialogue is, what it looks like on the page, and how to write it well. Dialogue is the term we use for anything the characters in a narrative say out loud. So remember, a narrative is just a fancy word for story. It could be a fictional story that you've made up yourself or that the author has made up, or a nonfiction one that's based on real life, often your own real experiences. Anything the characters in the story say to one another is called dialogue. You might also see it spelled D-I-A-L-O-G, but it means the same thing. Writing good dialogue can be tricky, but it's important to create strong narratives because it can move the plot forward, show character development, and set the mood and tone. Let's take a close look at how some dialogue actually looks on the page. There are some grammar and mechanics conventions that come with writing dialogue. So here I have 2 lines of dialogue. I can't imagine it going any other way, she sighed. No, he took a long pause and stared at the plane taking off. I guess you can't. So this is just some made up dialogue. It's probably from a drama. It feels very dramatic. And let's talk a little bit about how it is written. The most important thing I want you to notice is that anything that is said out loud is in quotation marks. That demonstrates to the reader what was actually said out loud versus what the narrator added to the equation. So if you open quotation marks, which is a word for starting a sentence with or a phrase with a quotation mark, then you have to close them. They're pairs. They always go together. Think of them like shoes. If you have one, you have to have the other. Notice how this piece of dialogue has quotation marks to make it clear which parts were actually said out loud and which parts the narrator added. So especially in this second part, all that he said out loud was, no, I guess you can't, right? Because that's the only part that's in quotation marks. In the middle there, that he took a long pause and stared at the plane taking off, he didn't say that part out loud. And I know that because of the quotation marks. So you have to make sure you put anything that you want to show was said out loud in those quotation marks. While we're on the subject of those quotation marks, let's look a little closer at them and notice that the punctuation goes inside the quotation mark. So I put the comma and then I close the quotation marks. Or down here where it says no, I put the period and then I close the quotation marks. So you always put your punctuation first and then your quotation mark. I also want to draw your attention to this little part that says she sighed. That is called a tag. Tags are important because they help your reader understand who is speaking, but we can also use them to give some key information. I'll show you more about that in a minute. Finally, I want you to notice that every time there is a new person speaking, there is a new paragraph. It doesn't matter if it's only been one sentence. If you have a new speaker, you need a new paragraph. Okay, so now we've looked at what dialogue looks like, but let's talk about how it actually works. One major thing we can do with dialogue is move the plot of the story forward. Here's an example from the short story The Veldt by Ray Bradbury. He bent and picked up a bloody scarf. This yours? No, George Hadley's face was rigid. It belongs to Lydia. So this is a scene from The Veldt, and the actual action is happening through dialogue. So we know that one character bent down and picked up a scarf, and that George looked at it and his face went rigid and he said, it belongs to Lydia. So the actual action is happening in the dialogue itself. Dialogue can also be used to provide important context to the readers. Context is information that will help them better understand the story. In this case, this is a line from The Veldt that helps the readers understand that Lydia, the mother in the story, is feeling purposeless because she lives in a house that does everything for her. So she says out loud, maybe I don't have enough to do. Maybe I have time to think too much. Without hearing her say this, we might think that she loves the house, that she doesn't want to do things on her own. But this provides some important context that helps us understand the full story. Dialogue can also help us know more about a character. This is especially true if it's a character that the narrator does not have access to. So limited narration means that the narrator cannot read the thoughts of all the characters. Sometimes they can't read the thoughts of any of the characters. So in this book, the narrator can see the thoughts of George, the dad, but everyone else is limited. The narrator can only describe what they do and, of course, what they say out loud. So Peter, which is the son, we can't see his thoughts. The narrator cannot tell us what Peter is thinking. Instead, the author uses dialogue to help us understand more about Peter's personality. In fact, we can tell he's pretty creepy. I wouldn't want the nursery locked up, said Peter coldly, ever. So he's kind of threatening his dad in this scene. So that dialogue helps us know more about his personality and his motivations. Dialogue can also be used to set the mood and tone. What the characters say out loud to each other isn't just for them, it's also for the reader. This line in the Welt helps set the ominous and creepy tone of the story as a whole. I don't imagine the room will like being turned off, said the father. Nothing ever likes to die, even a room. So that creepy tone kind of comes in through the dialogue. Okay, now that you know what dialogue looks like and why it's so important, let's talk about what happens when you write some of your own. There are two big pitfalls that I want you to know about. Writing dialogue is really useful, but it's also hard. One thing that makes it hard is the dialogue tags. If you don't use tags, your reader won't be able to tell who is talking. So let's look at this example. I'm going to the store to get some bread. Does anyone need anything? Nope, I do. I need fruit snacks. No one needs fruit snacks. Don't be pedantic. You know what I mean. We can't tell for sure who said what or even how many characters are involved. So this is a place that illustrates that we need dialogue tags. If we can't tell who's talking, we're going to be very confused. So here, I fixed it. It's clear who is talking because I added in dialogue tags for each line. Listen, I'm going to the store to get some bread. Does anyone need anything? Mom asked. Nope, Dad said. I do. I need fruit snacks, I said. No one needs fruit snacks, Dad said. Don't be pedantic. You know what I mean, I said. So I've made it clear who is speaking, but it's so boring. It just says he said, she said, I said, over and over and over again. I'm not interested. I am losing interest in this story. I'm yawning. I'm bored. What can I do to fix it? This is better. This time I have dialogue tags where I need them, but I skipped them when they weren't necessary. And I also changed the tags so that there was some description of what the characters were doing as they spoke, not just he said, she said. This adds some context and some interest. Let's take a look. I'm going to the store to get some bread. Does anyone need anything? Mom grabbed her purse off the rack. Nope, Dad said without looking up from his book. I do. I need fruit snacks, I shouted from the kitchen. No one needs fruit snacks, Dad said. Don't be pedantic. You know what I mean. So notice there at the end, I didn't even have to put who said it because it's clear who said it. And I've added in some actual action. You can see what the characters are doing as they have this conversation that makes it a little more interesting to read. The second pitfall is the hardest thing about writing dialogue, and that is walking the line between making it realistic and keeping it interesting. Let me show you what I mean. So we have dialogue in real life, right? Anytime you're talking to someone, you're having a dialogue. But in real life, our dialogue is often full of ums and uhs and starts and stops. We don't talk like characters in a book. We're a lot messier. And we're also pretty boring. We might just chat idly for a long time and might fill up 3 whole pages without really saying anything meaningful. We don't want our stories full of dialogue that doesn't do anything. So we can't just copy real life dialogue. It would be messy, it would be boring, and it probably wouldn't make a lot of sense. At the same time, if we go too far in the other direction, our dialogue can seem inauthentic. It comes across as fake. It feels like we're forcing the characters to say things just to move the plot along, and it can be really distracting. Bad dialogue can ruin a story. I wish I could tell you how to write good dialogue, but it's an art. You have to practice it as you go. I can end with a few tips though. Here are some tips I can give you. First, it's helpful to get to really know your characters before you start writing their dialogue. Whether you're writing a real life story that actually happened or making up a story of your own, really spend some time thinking about your characters and why they're doing what they're doing. This will help you make their dialogue more interesting and authentic. Next, don't be afraid to experiment. Try the same scene with and without dialogue and see what you think. The best dialogue writers aren't afraid to edit. They'll cut out what's repetitive or uninteresting, they'll add dialogue in to break up long descriptions or explanations, and they'll put the puzzle together in different ways to see which one really works the best. Finally, it's helpful to imagine the character moving around as they speak. What is their body language like? What is their facial expression like? You can add some of these details into the descriptions in the story itself, but just having them in your mind as you write will make your dialogue richer and more believable. So that is how dialogue works in narrative and some tips for how to write your own. I hope you are off to writing some excellent stories.